Story number 1. What Bobby Saw. At 8:50 p.m., old Mr. Andrew Hastings was reading a paperback when he heard a frantic knocking. He went to investigate and was shocked to find Bobby Burke, his neighborhood's 10-year-old son, at his front door weeping and wailing that someone was dead. At 9:05 p.m., the dark neighborhood streets were lit up by flashing lights as several police officers and an ambulance came screeching to a halt in front of the Burke residence. A few officers went towards the house next door to check on the boy, where Mr. Hastings had already stepped out to greet them. The rest of the officers rushed into the Burke house, guns drawn and at the ready. At 9:06 p.m., the officers found her, a teenage girl sprawled on the floor next to the couch, blood running down from her neck, glassy eyes staring at nothing. One officer sent out an urgent call for the paramedics as the others spread out into the house. At 9:08 p.m., a teary-eyed Bobby, wrapped in a heavy blanket, was in his neighbor's kitchen telling the police what happened, while Mr. Hastings called Bobby's parents. Bobby told the police he had been trying to go to sleep when he heard a sound downstairs, like glass breaking. At 9:10 p.m., the paramedics shook their heads. The girl next to the couch had her throat and both arteries opened by the wound on her neck. She bled out within seconds. At 9:11 p.m., Bobby shook as he recalled walking downstairs, just in time to see a man in a clown mask open his babysitter's throat with a knife. He said he didn't know what else to do and ran to Mr. Hastings for help. At 9:12 p.m., police found the back door to the Burke house open. Glass from the broken window scattered on the floor inside. A kitchen knife lay on the grass outside, slit with crimson. At 9:31 p.m., a station wagon came skidding to a stop in front of Mr. Hastings' house. An officer led the frantic Mr. and Mrs. Burke inside, where they embraced their crying son. At 9:34 p.m., the police got the name of the babysitter for Mr. Burke, Jessica Carlisle, and the contact information for her family. Next door, paramedics loaded Jessica's body into an ambulance. At 10:07 p.m., the Burkes had checked into a nearby hotel, while a frantic Mrs. Carlisle arrived at a hospital. At 10:12 p.m., as Mrs. Carlisle broke down at the sight of her daughter's body, Bobby Burke was peacefully drifting off to sleep, smiling at the memory of slicing her babysitter's throat, and marveling at how easily everyone had believed the story of a masked intruder. Story number 2. A prisoner I will never forget. Disclaimer. Names and certain facts will be changed to protect the identities of the innocent involved in this story. To be completely honest, I became a corrections officer because I felt like I couldn't fit in anywhere else. Is that sad? Yes. Is it true? When I made that decision, I truly felt that way. But after the story I'm going to tell you, I have decided to work harder to put myself in a better position in life. Anyways, this all happened last Monday, the only day of the week I worked overnight shifts. The entire prison was abuzz that day because just 8 hours earlier, a new prisoner was transferred there. Not just any prisoner, mind you, but a bona fide monster. It still isn't known exactly what happened, but when police raided the abandoned farmhouse the group were staying in, they discovered the hell that Harrison put his captives through. The professor had been completely skinned, and his skin had somehow been stretched enough that it covered a good bit of a horse's stall. The daughters had been brutally mutilated, two of which somehow had their organs surgically altered to cause them unending pain, and the other two had multiple appendages severed, and were used for various vile acts. The police were finally able to locate the farmhouse in March of 2019 after one of the daughters' phones had accidentally been turned on, resulting in a ping from a nearby cell tower. When the first few officers attempted to make arrests, they were met with armed resistance. So a couple hours later, 17 more and better armed officers arrived and engaged in a firefight with the group. One of the officers on scene had been deployed in Afghanistan before, and he remarked that this battle was worse than anything he had experienced over there. Off the record, he told a journalist, "One thing you will never be told about are the things that don't make sense. Mainly after we had overpowered them and arrested the survivors. The amount of spent ammo found in that barn did not match the rate of fire they had been using beforehand. That is something I've never been able to shake from my mind." The firefight lasted 45 minutes, wherein one police officer had died, 8 were seriously injured, and 9 cultists had died, with the rest being arrested after strangely laying down their weapons, admitting defeat. For some fucking reason, Harrison had been put into a supermax initially. This led to him somehow convincing 5 other prisoners to attempt an escape at their prison this past February. They nearly made it, but were stopped at the literal last second. This forced officials to smarten up, and after a long legal battle fought with paperwork, they finally came to the conclusion that they would be transferred to a supermax just 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately for me, due to a mixture of paperwork fuck up with the iffy COVID regulations, Harrison had to be vaccinated from his previous prison by the 1st, but he couldn't arrive at the supermax until the 3rd. So being the closest prison to the supermax, my great warden said he would take Harrison for a few days until he could be fully transferred. According to our co-workers I had spoken to, the entire day leading up to Harrison's arrival, staff and prisoners were talking about him. A good bit of chatter was about Harrison's looks. Guy's nearly in his 40s and he can still pass off for being 18. And his reputation for being extremely uncooperative with pushy people, which could describe 90% of both prisoners and corrections officers. Harrison arrived at my prison around 3 p.m. that day. The prisoners just had their lunch and various groups were starting to have recreation. Again, due to wonderful COVID regulations, we could not put Harrison into isolation due to the shitty timing. We had a big fight a few days before, so most of the rooms had been filled and others just had prisoners moved out. But there has to be a wait time before new prisoners is moved in there now. So he was moved to the community cell block where our riskiest prisoners are housed. Of course, my block. From what I've been told, things went smoothly for the first few hours. Harrison was constantly bombarded by prisoners in his room, asking all kinds of questions and some possibly trying to provoke him. But he just sat there on his bunk, completely silent. The prisoners were disappointed by not being able to play with him. So when the on-duty officers yelled at the other prisoners to leave the cell, they did so without complaint. It wasn't until my shift began, 7:30 p.m., that things started to break down. It started with a little argument over dinner. The 3 occupants of the cell to the right of Harrison's felt as though somehow he had been given a larger portion of food than anyone else. They started shouting at us, claiming that we were going to treat the celebrity better than them. Then, after we didn't give them the response they wanted, they began berating Harrison, calling him a creep, a freak, and that he wasn't tough, just sick. Now, I was never told what it was, but Harrison had yell-whispered an insult back to the 3 men, which caused them to jump from their table and storm Harrison's. Harrison jumped to his feet as well, and got in the faces of the other prisoners. I still remember the look of Harrison's eyes as he stared into theirs. He didn't really look angry, he looked hungry, like a predator that knew he had just caught some prey. Luckily for the officers on duty, the men never came to blows. After the stare down went on for a bit too long, both sides just decided to back off for some reason. The next 2 or so hours were alright. There were no more incidents, and the prisoners quietly went to their rooms at 9 for lights out. I was charged with direct observation from an upstairs room that night. About 20 minutes after the men went to bed, the overall block lights turned on, and then off, and they continued to do this in rapid succession for about 20 more seconds before stopping and leaving the lights on. I radioed to an officer and asked them what was going on with the lights. According to the guys downstairs, nobody had been in eyeshot of the light switch for the past few minutes, but they did confirm that someone had switched the block lights on. About 40 minutes later, I began to feel strange. Even though nothing had really changed, I was suddenly filled with extreme anxiety. So much so that I continuously squirmed in my chair and kept looking around the room. Felt like I was being watched by some man-eating beast. Unfortunately, this feeling was a bit indicated after my 4th look around, when I saw something awful in the door's window. Standing on the other side of the only door of the observation room was what I could only describe as a misshapen face. Grayed skin, a right eye that sat nearly half an inch lower than the left, a bulbous chin, and a nose that almost perfectly resembled a pig's snout. Obviously, I had never seen this face before, so with the classic fear hesitation coursing through my veins, I struggled to get out of my chair and moved slowly toward the door. About halfway there, the face disappeared from the window, and when this happened, it felt like a light had been switched. Feeling strangely empowered, I sprinted out of the room's door and looked around. Unfortunately for me, there was nobody in the hallway where the room's door was located in, so I sprinted towards the hallway connected to the left. Now, I swear, I was only gone for about a minute and a half, so you can imagine the jump scare I got when I arrived at the second hallway, only be met with a chorus of blood-curdling screams. I twisted around as fast as I could, trying to figure out where the screams were coming from, and when I realized that they were actually coming from inside the block, I ran back to my observation room, slammed down on the alarm button, and head back out so I could get into the block. The screams stopped as I sprinted down the stairs. Luckily, my fellow officers were quick, so a couple already had shields by the time I got to the block's entrance. We entered a few moments later, screaming at the prisoners to wake up and get on their cell's floor. One of the other officers demanded to know where the screams were coming from. "Officer, I believe that was my neighbors," a voice I had heard on the news crooned. The cell to the left of Harrison screamed that it wasn't them, so the other officers and I ran to the one on the right. Even though it has been over a week since, I can still smell the copper coating the inside of my nose. I wasn't at the front of the line, so my heart jumped as I heard one of the officers scream and frantically try to get the cell doors open. Inside was what I can only describe as meat. There wasn't a single identifying feature inside that room. The floor, walls, and ceiling were coated in blood, organs, and meat. Investigators allowed me to leave the prison once I'd given my statement, and I don't intend on going back. I did get in contact with one of the two officers that were declared mentally competent to remain on the job, though. According to them, Harrison was forced into solitary, against codes, on a blatant accusation of unruliness. According to the officers who moved him, he couldn't stop smiling. As for the dead prisoners, the investigation was handed to an unnamed authority. Thankfully, Harrison was moved to a supermax prison where he will remain for the rest of his life. But for me, I don't intend on taking another step inside a prison. Thanks for checking out this video. Please subscribe as I put out new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter at DanScares and Instagram at DanSMachinayT. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.